Do you want to work from your laptop while you travel the world? Well, for 2 years, that's exactly what I did. I did not have a lease the entire time. I went to over a dozen countries, 2 dozen cities, worked virtually the entire time, and I even actually saved a good amount of money. I saved definitely a lot more money than if I had been living in my home country, especially where I was living before in New York. And in today's video, I'm going to share my journey, how I did this. The world changes super fast. Of course, what worked for me might not work for you. I started before AI really took over a lot of things, so things change super fast. Um, and then I'm also going to talk about the pros and the cons of this digital nomad life that really go beyond the romance of it and the glamour of it that you see on Instagram and social media and people like promoting some course or whatever it is. I just want to keep it real and share my journey. I think what's really important to start off is that I'm super blessed and incredibly lucky. I graduated college in 2022. I went to New York University, which is a super expensive school. I was super fortunate that I got some scholarships, but also my parents paid for it. So that means I had no student loans. And right after I graduated college, that made it a lot easier for me to take a big risk. I was still on my parents' healthcare plan, and I didn't have to worry about loans. I think I'm also super fortunate in that my parents always supported me. I never felt that pressure. Like there's one kind of privilege, which is you have, the money and the resources, and there's another kind of privilege, which is like the people who raised you kind of gave you permission to explore who you are and who you want to be. And I was super lucky that I had both. And so at the end of college, my lease was ending in New York City, and I was too expensive. I couldn't afford it. And so I decided to I'm gonna just give freelance writing a go, and I'm gonna hop on a plane to, at that time my first trip was Barcelona. I ended up staying there for 3 months, and that turned into 2 years. If you want to become a digital nomad, I've kind of broken down my journey into really 3 steps. And I think even as things change, if you follow these 3 steps, then you can do it. Step number one for me was I only ever considered virtual and flexible work. So I think a lot of digital nomads that I see on kinds of Reddit threads and just talking to people is they have a full-time job, and then they try to be like, oh, how can I convince my boss? How can I, convince us to change our company's policies? And I think that's really an uphill battle. For me, I knew I wanted to travel. Traveling has always been something that I loved. And so if a job wasn't virtual, I didn't even consider it. Part two to this step is that I started looking for jobs for a year or two, even 2 years before that. I was starting to do different freelance writing stuff for super cheap well before I graduated college. Part of this was that, I didn't want to just get some job that would pay close to minimum wage. I really wanted to start a job that would help me in my career. And so I chose to start freelance writing. My first gigs, I probably made $75 per blog post. But over the months, and by the time I graduated, I had built that up to between $200 and $300 per article, which, for a recent college grad, that's really good. And I had a few steady clients by the time I graduated. And that made it possible for me to be okay, I'm making a solid $3,000 per month. I'm gonna go to Barcelona where I know I can live comfortably off of that. Another important part of my journey is that I leveraged personal connections to find these freelance writing gigs. I never used Upwork. I never used Fiverr. I never used LinkedIn. I mean, I have a LinkedIn account, but I never used it to try to get any jobs. Uh, it was all just about people I knew. And previous to that, I had some experience in the fitness industry when I was 18, 19, 20. I was a personal trainer. And so I kind of fused those two things. I was studying writing and I was a personal trainer. So I was a perfect fit to write for any kind of brands in that space. Once I figured out the virtual job, which I think is really the hardest part for a lot of people who want to be a digital nomad, who want to live that life or experience that life, that's the hardest part. That's the hardest part. And so play the long game. That was for me. And just anything that's not virtual or flexible, just say no. Does that mean I made less money? Yes. Yes. I chose flexibility over making more money. So when I graduated college, I was making probably around $3,000 per month. Instead of if let's just say I'd gotten a marketing job at some agency that post grads probably would have been making, let's say $60,000 a year. That's $5,000 per month. And that's just an example. hypothetical example. But I definitely said no to money in order to say yes to freedom and flexibility and the ability to work from wherever I wanted. And so if you want to do this, I think that's a choice you'll probably have to make. It's really hard to have it all. Step 2, breaking free from mental constraints. So many times throughout the years that I traveled, people ask me like, "Oh, where do you live?" And it's kind of like, "Oh, I kind of live nowhere." You know what I mean? And it always gets into this conversation, and people often ask like, "Oh, I wish I could do that." And what strikes me about this is the people who say this are almost never the people who are working two jobs, who are caring for an aging parent, who are, have kids in daycare. It's almost always the people who have just as much privilege as me. And, their parents pay for their schools, like they have good, stable jobs, but they have these like mental constraints and these fears holding them back. They can't go and do this because they haven't been able to see that the way they're living doesn't have to be the way they live. Okay, so you have the job figured out and you've kind of worked through whatever you need to do to just give yourself permission to go. Those are the two biggest things. Now you're doing it. Now you can just go and travel and work from your laptop and live that lifestyle. But I think a lot of people neglect step 3, which is building sustainable routines. Digital nomading is not a vacation. It's not a vacation. I made a point to work on my sleep routines, my exercise routines, my nutrition routines. That doesn't mean I was obsessed with it, but you can kind of like look at the 80-20 rule of this. And most of the time, I was still trying to eat healthy. Most of the time, I was still trying to get good sleep. Like my routine in Barcelona was I would work from like 9 a.m. to lunchtime, which in Spain is really late, like 2 p.m. And get a nice lunch, get a nap, maybe work in the afternoon, maybe not. But I think like having that morning block to do work was also really important and making sure that I got my work done and prioritizing that. And yes, that means I often like didn't adventure as much as I wanted to every day, every week. But because I was there for a longer time, that was not as big a deal. I think joining a gym wherever I went was really key. I think finding my 2 to 3 reliable, healthy food options. Maybe that's going out, but maybe it was getting groceries and making sure I had that. It was limiting hostel stays to like 4 days in a row max because that was just too much. And yeah, I prefer to stay like in an Airbnb where I have a private room like with a host. And those types of decisions I made really helped me be able to do this, not just for a few weeks or a few months, but really be like I could do this forever. And even when I stopped, it wasn't because I was burnt out. Like it wasn't because I wasn't eating well, it wasn't because I wasn't exercising, it wasn't because I wasn't getting my work done. Those 3 things, figure out your job situation, give yourself permission, and then build sustainable routines, you can live this lifestyle. Okay, next I want to talk about some of the pros and cons of the digital nomad life. I'm going to talk about ones that I think people don't talk about enough because some of the pros and cons are very obvious, like travel experiences, cultural exposure. For me, language learning. I became trilingual. I learned Spanish and Catalan. I kind of learned Spanish before, but I really like mastered Spanish and then learned Catalan. Saving money, like my rent in New York was 1770 when I left, which is crazy. That was I mean, that's now I'd be like, wow, that's a deal. But back then, like 3 years ago, that was really bad. Versus in Barcelona, it was like I paid like $1,000 for like a way bigger and way nicer space. Avoiding winter, I think that's like a classic reason people want to be digital nomads is you can be on a beach, you can be in places that are sunny year round, and that's really awesome. But I think that the underrated pros are the things that have really stuck with me. I think having a lifelong connection to places, like for me that was Barcelona. Like I've gone back so many times. I have some of my best friends in the world there. And just allowing yourself to like really connect to a different culture, to get to know people from a very different background. I think another really underrated benefit of digital nomading for me is it really inspired me in like thinking about what kind of world I wanted to live in and what kind of world I wanted to help co-create with all of you, with all of my fellow members of humanity. And I don't mean to get too spiritual or like too woo-woo on that, but it's true. Like we build this world together, and like to see how how Medellin, for example, had added like 1 million plants to their city and how that reduced the temperature and improved the air quality. I was like, wow, that's really cool. Like we could really do that. The way traveling around Europe, like taking the high speed trains, I was like, wow, those are amazing. Like why don't we have those? Like we should build these. Learning about urban planning and transportation and environmental protection and like even different lifestyle things like seeing how the Spaniards are just not as rushed. Like they take naps during in the middle of the day still, a lot of them, and that's really cool. And seeing that in all kinds of different countries and how they do things super differently was really inspiring to me, and it made me want to return home to the United States and be like, I think we could do things a little bit better around here, and like here's some of my ideas. Like let's work together to create that. And really, since returning, I've become much more active, getting to know my neighbors. I volunteer at our tenants association in this building where I live. I volunteer with a environmental justice group in the South Bronx, and that has been super fun. And so it really has just like inspired me to be a much more active community member. And I wouldn't have had that without these digital nomad experiences. I think another big pro for me was the mental freedom of owning less. Like when I traveled, I never checked a bag, and I don't recommend you do it. I traveled with so few things, and I came to realize like why do I own all this stuff? Like I've been wearing the same four t-shirts. No one cares. No one notices. I like these four t-shirts. Little stuff like that. It's like why do I have 25? And that goes for so many different things. And it has really allowed me to accept that like I don't want a big house. Sounds exhausting to manage. I don't want to have a basement that's crowded with too much stuff. That's like I want to own less because I know that gives me freedom. I know that gives me flexibility. And that was something that really hit me once I traveled around the world with just a backpack. Another pro was having agency, realizing that I had so much agency over my life. I remember I was just like in Peru for no reason. Like I was like, I'm just gonna go check out Peru. And I was like, why am I here? And it's like because I wanted to be, because I chose to be. And in that moment, realizing that I had agency over my life was super powerful. Like I actually do have the opportunity to make choices and live how I want to live. And most people don't really get that. Not to the same level, that's for sure. And really experiencing that really hit me. And now no matter what I do in my life, I am much more aware of the decisions I'm making, whether it's a decision I actually want, whether it's a path I actually want. And I don't think I would have had that without my digital nomading experiences. Developing just like internal stability and discipline. I learned how to eat healthy, exercise, sleep well, and get work done regardless of my external environment. And I think that's kind of a superpower. I think it's kind of a superpower to be able to like do work on a bus, like on a Greyhound bus or on an Amtrak or whatever it is. And no matter what the chaos is going on around me, like I now know that I'm capable of figuring out my internal stability. And I think that's really incredible. And then language learning. I mean, I've written a lot about language learning. If you're interested in that, check out some of my articles on my blog. So fulfilling, so rewarding, so intellectually stimulating, so connecting, and just not talked about enough. And if you're living somewhere for a span of at least a few months, which a lot of digital nomads do, spend a few months in places at a time. I know I did. You can learn. Okay, now let's get into the cons of digital nomading because it's not all roses. It's not all sitting on a beach. That's definitely not what it is, despite what social media will have you believe. There's some ones that I think a lot of people think of, missing family and friends. That's big. That's huge. I had some family stuff come up. My partner, she had some family stuff come up while we were abroad, and that was really hard. That was tough to be an ocean away from them at that time. The cultural adjustment, there's definitely an adjustment period, that like discomfort. People say that. I'm a flexible dude. I kind of rode with it. Lacking a home base, I get it now. At the time I was nomading, I was like, I don't need a home base. I love the flexibility. But people do say that a lot, like not having a place for your stuff. I will say like I did have some stuff, like my books were at my parents' house the whole time, and so I'm lucky in that respect that I had a place to put things that I couldn't bring with me in my backpack. Having variable work conditions people talk about, like, but again, I think if you figure out your routines, that's fine. Decision fatigue, planning travel all the time. I think if that's you, then stay somewhere for longer, stay somewhere for 2 to 3 months rather than a place every few weeks. And then another thing people talk about is the legal and tax complications. I don't really think you need to worry about that too much unless you're going to stay somewhere longer than 3 months, because most places, 3 months is the tourist visa. And so as long as if you leave after 90 days, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. If you want to stay longer, that's when it comes into play. I left after 90 days, like the Europe Schengen zone. I would leave for 90 days, and then you can come back in after 90 days. So you can do it that way too, and just kind of like avoid that problem. But I want to talk about the real reasons why I stopped. The first one is family and friends. I don't really think there's that much I need to say about that, because that is huge and it is hard living away from your family. The second reason is that I wanted to, kind of as I talked about earlier in this video, I had seen so many things traveling that inspired me, and I was ready to go from being an observer to an active participant, to find a community where I could make a difference, to find a community where I could support people and be supported. And I wanted to apply a lot of those lessons that I had seen about transportation, urban planning, lifestyle, all these sorts of things. And I was really excited about that. I remember I went to Perpignan, which is a small city in southern France that still speaks Catalan. And I went to a Catalan community center event, and just like seeing how they all come together, they like shared food they were growing, and they were singing and dancing, and it was just amazing. I was like, wow, I would love to be a part of that, be fighting for a place where I am. I was excited for a next phase. I think that's true as well. 2 years was a great length of time to be without a lease, but I was ready to find a home. Excited for that next phase. There's nothing wrong with being like, digital nomading was a different chapter, was an exciting chapter, and now I'm gonna move on to a different chapter, an equally exciting chapter. Some professional reasons, I wanted to move back to New York because I'm a writer. If you want to make it in writing, you could do it anywhere, of course, but a lot of the people are based in New York. A lot of the opportunities are here in New York, and I love this city. And then the other thing is I only signed a 1 year lease. It's not like I'm stopping forever. We'll see. I'm probably gonna re-sign with my partner. We're probably gonna re-sign, but we can keep our options open. Like, we don't have to. We could go back on the road if we really wanted to. And those are the real reasons why I stopped. So I think, like, so often in these conversations about digital nomading, it just gets so caught up in the cultural imagination of it instead of what it's actually like. And it's so incredible and it's so amazing. And just like all the experiences you've had, it's another experience. It's another life experience to learn from and enjoy and appreciate and struggle with. And that's the beauty of life in so many respects. And so if you have the opportunity to do it, I really recommend you do it. Go for it. Remember that no decision is permanent. You can go for a few weeks. If you hate it, you can head back home. To me, it felt like something temporary to be enjoyed. I think like the typical example for this is like a glass of wine. That was amazing, especially like I was still in my early 20s. I was from ages 23 to 25 is when I did this. And then I would say the last thing is, think of yourself, like, don't think of yourself as a local, of course, but try to live more like a local. Try to learn from the locals. Try to talk to them. Try to hear about their lifestyle, how they live. Don't just do touristy stuff. Really, do some things, of course, like that. There are good reasons why some things are very touristy, but balance that out with local living. Make local friends. Those connections for me have gone way beyond this idea of like virtual work and digital nomading. And it's something that has really touched me forever. So now, more than 2 years later, almost 3 years later since I originally left, it's been just an incredible journey. It has taught me so much about what makes me happy. It's taught me so much about what I want in life. Really showed me how much freedom I have. It's really been like powerful intellectual fuel for all of these interests that have emerged. And I'm just so grateful for the experience. So that's what I got. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. Shoot me a message on my website. I do respond to those things. So thank you all for watching so much. Oh, and if you do appreciate this video, I'm going to be making more. Subscribe, like it, that type of stuff apparently helps. I'd love to do more. So let me know.